30 years since I got out of the service. We're going to talk about is veterans benefits. We're going to talk about veteran service organizations, disability compensation, special adaptive housing grant, automobile grant, survivors benefits, burial benefits, and state and local veterans benefits. Veteran service organizations are chartered by Congress to represent veterans with the VA, so the veterans don't have to deal with the VA directly. We do this free of charge. There are organizations like Paralyzed Veterans of America, Disabled American Veterans, American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars. States also have service officers. And in Oregon, they have county veteran service organizations, service officers, who are accredited with different organizations and can present claims on behalf of veterans to those different organizations. And I provided the website addresses for individuals. If they want to look for an organization, they can do that as well. Disability compensation is a tax-free benefit that is paid to veterans that have disabilities that are a result of their military service that were either incurred or aggravated during active duty service, or secondary conditions. There's also some veterans that can be granted based on treatment, injuries that result of treatment in service. One of the eligibility criteria is must have a discharge under conditions other than dishonorable. The VA rates disabilities based on severity, ranging from 0% to 100, based on mild, moderate, moderately severe, and severe. Once a veteran is rated 30% or higher, they are entitled to receive additional compensation for their dependents, spouse, children. And like I said, there's different ways of being granted service connection. Direct, the injury was a direct result of service. It was a pre-existing condition that was aggravated by military service. Secondary service connection, presumptive, and 1151 is if you're injured as a result of medical treatment. We're going to focus today on presumptive. ALS is a presumptive condition for veterans. So with ALS, you have to have 90 days of active duty service and are diagnosed with ALS. There's some other criteria for presumptive related to POWs, things like that. But we want to, again, focus on the ALS. So you have to have 90 days of active service. We have a number of individuals that have active duty for training that may not qualify. But there's other ways around that we can work and try and get that granted service connection. One of the, I didn't put it in there, I must thought I did. One of the things with, going back to ALS, sorry, jumping ahead. ALS previously had to be diagnosed within 1 year from date of service. It wasn't until the Gulf War when a number of Gulf War veterans were being diagnosed earlier with ALS, earlier than their the fifth decade. So we had veterans being diagnosed in their 20s and 30s and 40s with ALS. Based on that, the Secretary of the VA at the time established presumptive for Gulf War veterans. Then in 2008, Secretary came out and, based on a study done at Harvard, established presumption of service connection for all veterans that have at least 90 days of active duty, based on a study that was done at Harvard that showed that veterans or individuals that served in the military were 60% higher chances of being diagnosed with ALS than their non-veterans. So in September of 2008, the VA granted service connection, established service connection for ALS for all veterans. At that time, the valuation for ALS, the minimum valuation was 30%. And as the disease progressed, we filed claims for veterans to get them rated the higher. In 2012, after listening to the ALS Association and the Veteran Service Organizations saying we had a number of veterans that weren't making it up to 100%, the secretary increased the minimum evaluation from 30% to 100% for ALS. And this stopped a lot of veterans being from reevaluated for their conditions as it progressed. So this was a very big step, going from 30% to 100% in 2012. Next one. One of the things also was granted was entitlement to special adaptive housing grant. Previously, veterans were eligible for the special adaptive housing grant if they met one of these criteria: permanent loss of use of both lower extremities, permanent disability due to blindness in both eyes with central visual acuity of 5/200 or less, or excuse me, 20/200 or less. Permanent total disability of loss of use of one lower extremity together with residuals of organic disease. I gotta go to my next slide. Sorry about that. So previously, veterans with ALS had to be rated this way. In 2013, the VA changed that. And they established that, or they determined that veterans with ALS were not be able to use the grant because they didn't live long enough. And it took a longer process to be able to use the grant. So on December 3rd, 2013, the secretary established that if you're granted service connected for ALS, you're automatically entitled to the housing grant. This allowed the veterans with ALS to be able to use that grant sooner than later. So this was a big thing. Based on this same rationale, the amendment conditions the eligibility for housing grants for veterans with service-connected ALS. So I'm stuttering, excuse me. The overall SAH grant approval and oversight process is very complex and lengthy, with many parts beyond the veterans' control, VA's control. So permits, construction, equipment, stuff like that. The VA has no control on. So that's one of the reasons why they expedited established entitlement. By shortening this change, veterans suffering from ALS are able to adapt their houses and get into adapted housings before their conditions become too debilitating. It also lengthens the period they will be able to use the core grants. Currently, the grant amount is $101,754. Next slide, please. The automobile grant. The automobile grant, veterans had to meet these criteria, different criteria, prior to being entitled. And so they had to have loss of use of one or both lower extremities, one or both upper extremities, permanent impairment of the vision of both eyes, severe burn, and there now ALS is listed. But it wasn't until February 25th, 2015, when the VA established this. They used the same criteria that they did for the Special Adaptive Housing Grant to establish entitlement for the automobile grant. So now, as of 2015, once a veteran was granted service connection, they're automatically entitled to the housing grant and the automobile grant. Another benefit that they established was they made the condition permanent, so they would be entitled to CHAMP VA benefits for spouses or children. And currently the grant is $22,355.72. I know I'm going a little fast, so if you guys would like, please slow me down. And we're going on to survivor benefits. Survivor benefits, dependency indemnity compensation. This is for widows where the veteran passed away because of a service-connected condition, or that they've been rated 100% for 10 years preceding death and pass away from any condition. If a veteran was discharged from the military and rated 100% for at least 5 years preceding death, or former POW. We assist all our veterans and their widows in our office. We'll fill out the paperwork, we'll send it out to them to apply, to try and make it easier for them, because it's very overwhelming. It's overwhelming when you deal with being diagnosed with ALS and having to deal with the government. And it's overwhelming when you're dealing with the death of a loved one and dealing with the government. So we try to make it an easier transition. We'll fill out the forms and send it all out. I also have down there death pension. Death pension, we're not going to be worried about that because it's an income-based benefit. If a veteran passes away because of ALS, they don't have to worry about pension. The DIC will be the greater benefit. When they grant survivors dependence in education, when a veteran's rated 100%, they're established entitlement to dependence education. So the spouse can use it while the veteran is alive. If they don't use it, then when the veteran passes away, they could be entitled again. A lot of times the spouses are their caregivers, so they don't have the opportunity to go to school, take advantage of that benefit. So once the veteran passes away, then they can take advantage of it. Accrued benefits is if a claim is pending for the veteran at the time of death. When we file for accrued benefits, the VA will make a determination on the DIC portion first. Then they'll have to make a determination on DIC. Accrued. Accrued is based on the records alone because the veteran's unable to make the exam, so it's based on records alone. And then I also put down CHAMP, Civilian Health and Medical Program. It's called, otherwise known as CHAMP VA. This is a insurance program for dependents. They're entitled to it while they are, the veteran is rated 100%, and they would be entitled to it if they are granted DIC. The only time they would not be eligible for this is if the veteran is a military retiree and has TRICARE. If they have TRICARE, they are not eligible for CHAMP VA. Next slide, please. Burial benefits. Veterans are automatically entitled to burial in the national cemeteries based on military service. And they're entitled to a headstone marker or medallions provided at the VA's expense. So the VA will provide the headstone, but there may be some placement costs for that depending on the cemetery. Veterans are entitled to presidential memorial certificates. This is signed by the current president of the United States, thanking the veteran's family for his service. The veteran is also entitled to burial flags. These are all benefits you have earned just being a veteran. One of the differences now with reimbursement of burial expenses. Service-connected cause of death, there is burial expenses of $2,000 that the VA will pay reimburse for. For non-service connected, I think it's like $500, and I'm not sure. But we would help apply for those benefits at that time. Funeral homes also help with applying for benefits, for burial benefits. So it's important to know about what state and local benefits there are besides federal. Like for instance, because I'm from Washington, I put down some of the benefits that are entitled to veterans in the state of Washington. 100%, there's maybe a property tax relief. There's free or reduced rates for passes, motor vehicle license, fishing, hunting, selfish seaweed license. So you can get the license free, but then you would pay for the tabs. State parks. In the state of Washington, you're eligible to go to the state parks free. You can stay there, use the boat launch fees. You don't have any of those. Reduce public transportation fees. If you're a disabled veteran, you may be entitled to reduce fare on the ferries or bus systems. And sales tax exemptions, adaptive housing for disabled veterans. Those are some different benefits that veterans are eligible for. Big one in the state of Washington is a tuition waiver or the reduction of tuition. Veterans that are service connected, 100%, their dependents are eligible for the tuition waiver if they're going to a state school. If they're going to like Evergreen State College, it's not a state school, it's a private school. They would not be eligible for that. So they can use the tuition waiver and the dependents education at the same time. It's a very big benefit. And then there's a website you can go to. It's the National Association of State Department of Veterans Affairs. And they have, you can look in all the states and find out what their benefits are. Next slide, please. I know I went through that relatively quick. And if I did go over too quick, please let me know and I can answer any questions if there may be any questions.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and invite folks who have questions. You're welcome to put those in the chat, or if you'd just like to come off mute, you can do that. Oh, looks like we got a question from Liz. Is the automobile grant, i.e. van for the power wheelchair, different than getting an adaptation to a vehicle lift, like a lift for using a power scooter? Great question.
They are. The automobile grant is more for wheelchairs, specifically like power wheelchairs, because power wheelchairs, you're going to need the floors lowered. You may need the roof raised. They're going to need to know how much the chair weighs, how high you sit in it, how wide is the chair. So a lot of people will use the grant at that time that they need the power wheelchair. But there's nothing saying you can't use the grant when you have a scooter. But there's also another grant, and I don't know if Kristi covers it or not. It's the non-service connected van lifts, where the VA can put a lift on the back of a vehicle for a scooter. And they don't have to be service connected for that.
Now, Michael, if somebody were to do that and get the lift for the scooter on the back of their vehicle when they're using a scooter, and then at a certain point progress to needing a power wheelchair, would they still be eligible for both of those options? Or is it like using one benefit and then you've lost it for using the power chair?
I don't believe there's any penalty for using it. And I can find out from prosthetics, but I don't believe you're going to be penalized if you take advantage of the non-service connected van lift, because some of our veterans will use that when they're pending claims. and then they'll be entitled to the automobile grant later on once service connection is granted, and they can use that later.
I am service connected, and Matt was talking with me about getting a lift for this scooter. I just want to make sure that that's not gonna mess up that vehicle grant down the road when I do need a van for a power wheelchair.
Like I said, I don't believe it will, and I can find out from prosthetics, and I can let Casey know so she can go back out to you. I will also let Matt know, since I work with Matt, but I do not believe it will mess up your entitlement to that automobile grant.
Okay.
The reason I don't believe it'll mess it up, the van lift is prescribed by Veterans Health. The automobile grant is prescribed or issued by Veterans Benefits. And they are different administrations. So there's some duplication of some benefits, like Homemaker Home Health Aid. I know it was still Kristi's thunder, but you can get aid and attendance and Homemaker Home Health Aid. So there's different things that are qualified for both, under both. And then the difficulty finding special adaptive housing grant is finding contractors in the rural areas. Ideas for PALS veterans in the rural areas from the metro region. That is an issue a lot of people are dealing with. We have in Montana, Idaho, in Eastern Washington, and Eastern Oregon. There's not a lot of contractors out there that are familiar with the housing grant and the whole the intricacies of the grant. The only thing I can encourage you to do is talk to other veterans that use the grant, and maybe they have some ideas. Even sometimes the social workers, when we meet with veterans in the clinic, we always ask if they're using the grant, who's their housing agent, and who's their contractor, so we can use that as a reference later on if someone's having problems.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's a tough time right now for contractors. Yeah. So I have a couple of questions that just came up that that we just get asked a lot. And one, you've already kind of talked about this, but I'd like to bring up just a question that we get often is for National Guard folks or folks who served in the reserves. Understandably, if they did not have 90 days of consecutive service, it's my understanding that they wouldn't qualify for benefits. But I'm wondering if, just from your perspective, what you would suggest for those folks. Is there anything that they can do? Any options that they might have?
So there's a lot of different areas. If a reservist were activated for the Gulf War, Afghanistan, war on Iraq, then they make meet the criteria because they served on active duty. Now, if an individual was not activated and they did strictly reserves, if they were, because they have to have the 90 days, we can look to see if there was any injuries in a period of service where we can try and get them direct service connection for something. Once we get them direct service connection, then that may establish that they would recognize that period of service as valid or active duty service. Then we would have to look to see if they have the number of days to qualify. So there's little things we have to look into and try and do.
Yeah, appreciate that. I know it could be a really challenging position for many veterans to be in if they, just don't meet that one qualifying factor. So it sounds like there maybe are a few options, and we know the Paralyzed Veterans of America has been so great at helping support people and give them information on different options. So thanks, Michael. Do other folks have questions before we have Kristi share a little bit? See anybody? Okay, great. And we can always come back, of course, to any questions that pop up. So now we're going to have Kristi Ketchum share some information more on the side of resources within the VA health system here in Portland. And Kristi, let's see, just make sure we are able to get you pinned. Okay, perfect. All right.
All right, can folks see my screen?
We can.
You can, okay,
Yes.
great.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about the health administration side, and I appreciate Michael kind of mentioning the distinction between the two different sides of the house, because there are benefits that are available through the benefits side, the VBA, and then benefits available through the resource side. So it's helpful to make that distinction because you can get things from both sides of the house, but sometimes we are not fully aware of what's going on the other side. I'm going to talk a little bit just about our ALS clinic at the Portland VA. It's really similar to other ALS clinics in that we have a full staff of what we call a multidisciplinary staff of providers who meet with veterans and their families. We also work with the ALS Association. So if you receive your care at the Portland VA, which I recognize many of you, we will have asked you to sign a release of information that allows us to collaborate with ALSA around resources that you might need or could be helpful for you. We see patients on Tuesdays, usually in the afternoon, and we meet 3 times a month as part of our clinic. We're still doing the bulk of our visits virtually, but we do have patients who come in person, partially based on patient requests, and then partially if we need folks to come in and be seen in person as the best way to provide care. So for veterans who are 100% service connected, which we know that veterans with ALS are, there's a range of services that are covered by the VA, just kind of as a benefits package. And that means that there's no fees or co-pays for these services. So, if you have an office visit, if you have prescriptions, those things are all covered by the VA. We also cover a pretty wide range of equipment, which I think is one of the big benefits of receiving care at the VA. Some of the equipment that folks with ALS really could benefit from can be pretty expensive, and most insurances don't fully cover, or some don't cover at all, some of this equipment. So you can get power chairs, communication technology, stair lift, ramp to enter your home, enter and exit your home. So there's just a really wide range of equipment that we can provide at no cost, imaging that we can provide at no cost. Michael talked a little bit about the SAH grant to modify the home, and the healthcare side of the house. We have a pretty small in comparison grant available to veterans called the HISA grant, the Home Improvement Structural Alteration Grant, that can pay for some small little things, maybe left over from HISA or from the SAH grant, or that come up after you've had your home modified. So that's a small grant that's an option that we can help you with at the VA if you want to apply for it. And when I say small, it is $6,000. So it's small in comparison to that SAH grant, but it is a nice amount of money if you need to do something like widening a doorway or putting in a walk-in shower or something like that. Transportation is also an option at a point where family members are no longer able to help people transport in their adapted vehicles. So we can help provide medical transportation to and from VA appointments. So that's another kind of example of some of just the basic services that are covered when you receive your care at the VA. We also offer a range of kind of in-home services, one of which is home-based primary care. And I should say that I'm not sure how many folks we have on the call who are outside the Portland service area, but there's kind of a general package of services that are available for veterans all over the country, regardless of which VA you receive care at. But it might look a little bit different from VA to VA. So Puget Sound might look a little different. Roseburg catchment area might look a little different, but those services are generally going to be offered. So just a little caveat I wanted to mention there. So home-based primary care basically provides most of the services that you receive from an in-clinic primary care provider in the comfort of your own home. So you can see your PCP, you can see a nurse, a psychologist, a social worker, PT, OT, all of these folks who are able to come and provide services. I think one of the limitations of home-based primary care is that it's geographically restricted in the Portland area. So you have to live in one of these 4 kind of service areas in order to receive home-based primary care. But they do have home-based primary care down in the Roseburg area, the White City area, Walla Walla as well. So this is a great option for folks where it just becomes difficult to leave the home to receive services. Then the VA offers 2 different home care programs for veterans. The first is the Home Health Homemaker Aid Program, sometimes called HHA and sometimes called HAHA. It's not funny, but it's just what people call it. The VA likes to pronounce its acronyms. So there's HHA, and then there's Veteran Directed Care. The VA also has contracts with adult day health programs in the community, day centers where folks can go and do activities and interact with others during the day. But I found that a lot of ALS veterans use that resource less than the in-home care resources. So I didn't put very much information about that program here. So just the basic eligibility for the home care programs is patients have to be enrolled in receiving care at the VA, either from a VA PCP who's at a clinic or in home-based primary care, or community care VA PCP. And then the big piece is that it's for veterans who need assistance with your activities of daily living. So the things that are listed here, like dressing, bathing, but it also includes, transferring in and out of a chair or in and out of the bed, being able to do your personal grooming, using the restroom, including if you need help with incontinence or bowel and bladder care. So there's a wide range of services, or a wide range of activities that could make someone eligible for one of these 2 programs. So just a little bit more about the Homemaker Home Health Aid Program. These 2 programs are fairly similar, Homemaker Home Health Aid and Veteran Directed Care. The biggest difference is that the HHA program has a set number of hours per week. And the caregiving is provided by caregiving agencies that the VA contracts with in the community. So we would have a contract with, for example, Visiting Angels, and then they would work with you to hire caregivers to come into the home and provide care. Veteran Directed Care does not work with agencies. It instead provides you with a budget, and you can use those funds to hire private caregivers only. So you can't hire from an agency, but it gives you more flexibility because you can find and hire from a wider range of folks. But it's only available in certain counties. So the counties that are listed here are for the Portland metro area, but I know that there are counties down in Roseburg and White City as well, if you're interested in the Veteran Directed Care Program. One thing that I think is important to mention, and I'm sure I'm not sure, but I'm guessing folks may have encountered this, is that there has been a significant shortage of caregiving over the past 2 years. So even when folks have access to these resources, let's say the VA approves the resource for you and is able to offer you services, there may not be caregivers available. And it's especially restricted, like Mary mentioned, in rural areas. We're just seeing kind of unprecedented caregiving shortages in the United States over the last few years. So that is a limitation of specifically the Homemaker Home Health Aid program, but also if you're just trying to hire a caregiver to come in to help out. And then this last program is a very small program. I think there's only 2 veterans who are participating in it in the whole Portland VA at this point, but it's called Private Duty Nursing, and it's a limited program for veterans who need specialized care related to ventilator support. So if you have a tracheostomy and you have a ventilator, the VA has a program for patients that can provide some additional skilled in-home health with a nurse, registered nurse, or licensed professional nurse. Because that's such a limited program, you would need to talk with the Portland VA ALS clinic for more details about how to make that program happen.
Kristi, is this a good moment just to ask a quick question about the HaHa program?
Sure.
When someone asked, is cooking, housekeeping, and laundry included as criteria for that program, or is a service they could provide?
Yeah, so the caregivers can help with cooking, light housekeeping, and laundry, but it's not itself an eligibility category. So what was the question about eligibility, or about whether or not the VA will cover that care? Or both?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Eligibility.
Eligibility.
Eligibility. Yeah. So unfortunately, no. It focuses mostly on those personal care services. And if you need help with personal care, the VA can approve someone to come in and provide help with cooking and cleaning and that kind of thing, but it does not make you eligible for that program. Is it, should I move on, or other questions?
No, I think that was the only one that came in on the chat. So I think it's fine to keep moving. But if folks do have other questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll interrupt Kristi.
Oh yeah, please do, please do. So the other program I wanted to mention is the VA has we have a caregiver support program that's divided into kind of 2 areas. One is a general caregiver support program for veterans or for caregivers of veterans or veterans who are caregivers. And then there's this program of comprehensive care for family caregivers. It is a mouthful. We call it PCAFC, and it has not been pronounced yet, so I'm not sure how that would be pronounced. But this is a program that helps caregivers who have been put in a position to have to provide care to their loved ones. And so veterans are eligible if you have, 70% service-connected rating or higher. If you have an injury related to your military service, and it can be something that happened while you were in the military. It can be one of those presumptive conditions like ALS that Michael mentioned. And right now, the eligibility criteria is if you served on or before May 7th, 1975, or after 9/11, 2011. However, in October of this year, that eligibility criteria is lifted. So any veteran who meets the 70% service connected and has an injury that's related to their military service could be eligible to apply for this program. You do need to require assistance for at least 6 months. You need help with your daily care activities, those ones that I talked about with the Homemaker Home Health Aid Program, or if you're somebody who needs kind of protection or supervision for safety. And we tend to see this most often with conditions like dementia, but sometimes we see this when people who have ALS have cognitive or memory impairment. So you can also fall into the eligibility category for this program based on that. Caregiver eligibility is pretty generous. So you have to be at least 18, a family member, or somebody who lives with the veteran full-time or is willing to move in and live with the veteran full-time to provide care. And the benefits to the caregiver are pretty significant. You get a monthly stipend, and I think it's based on the federal government GS scale. So it's a fairly generous compensation for the caregiver. You can get that CHAMP VA insurance that Michael talked about if you don't have it already, mental health services, travel benefits to access VA healthcare, to take the veteran to access VA healthcare. And then there's a respite benefit. So if the caregiver needs to go out of town or they're having a surgery and they can't provide care to the veteran, that is a benefit as well. There's also a secondary caregiver. So if you have, somebody as a backup, they can receive services, some of these benefits as well, specifically counseling, travel, and respite. And if you are approved for this program, you'll be assigned to a VA caregiver support coordinator who will provide regular check-ins with you as a caregiver and with the veteran for any needs that might come up. So I wanted to just give you a couple of links. So if you're interested in finding out more about the caregiver support program or the program for comprehensive assistance for family caregivers, I've got a couple links here for you. And then if you want to sign up with home-based primary care, or if you think that it's time to look into in-home care, you can talk with your team at the VA and we can help connect you with those resources. Any questions?
Well, I'll kick us off with a quick question, Kristi. So jumping back to the HISA grant, I know the SHA grant, the bigger one, folks have to go through quite a process to get the modifications done on their home. But with the HISA grant, I was curious, do veterans get like a lump sum for the adaptations that they want to make through the home, or do they need to go through a VA process for that?
There is a VA process, not surprisingly, but it's not as onerous as the SIH grant, only because it's not as large of a program. So it's there's an application process. An occupational therapist has to recommend the modification, whatever it is that needs to be done. That can be the physical or the occupational therapist who's in the ALS clinic. They can recommend that you have a drop-in shower put in, for example, and then the healthcare provider enters a request for this HISA grant, and they send you some paperwork to fill out. There's a little bit of back and forth. Sometimes the program can take, I think, upwards of 9 months, and that it gets drawn out most often for one of the issues we've talked about, which is finding a contractor, but the other is just not turning the paperwork back in. So if you're somebody who's able to get the paperwork in quickly and kind of move the process along, it's not something that takes a really long time.
Great.
And if I can add on to that, a couple of things. the VA will pay the veteran. They don't pay they used to pay the contractor. They've changed that and they pay the veteran now, and then the veteran's responsible to pay the contractor. And another thing I was going to add on, sometimes the housing agent that's working with the veteran will use both the HISA grant and the housing grant to get more for their money, because there's some things that are covered under HISA that's not covered under the housing grant, and vice versa. So you can take it up to almost like $107,000.
Michael, do you know what those things that are and aren't covered off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head,
Okay.
but I can find out, because it does talk about that in the regulations.
That would be great. That's really interesting. I took a bunch of notes while you were talking because I learned some things from you. So that was great.
And I had a question with the caregiver support program.
Mhm.
The 30 days, is that in addition to the 30 days veterans are already entitled to, or is that separate? Or they're the same?
I don't know the answer definitively. I'm gonna guess that it's in addition to.
Okay.
But since it's recorded, it's not a definitive answer. But I think it would be in addition to, since any veteran would be entitled to that regular 30 days of respite.
And that's a good benefit to know.
What questions do folks have for Kristi or Michael? If you don't ask them, I've got a whole bunch of them right up here. I really do. One, I think probably for you, Kristi, we often get asked about transportation to ALS clinic. And you might have already touched on this in your presentation. I can't recall, but what transportation options does the VA provide?
Yeah, so it depends largely on how much assistance you need to travel. So if a veteran is using a wheelchair or a scooter full time, the VA can provide medical transportation, usually through an outfit like Metro West, that will send a wheelchair van, or we can send a stretcher van if you're someone who can't travel safely or comfortably in a wheelchair van. If you are more mobile and just using a walker, there's more limitation. But we have the Veterans Transportation Program and the DAV. Both of those programs can provide shuttles that will pick people up and transport them within a 25-mile radius to the Portland VA. In non-pandemic times, the DAV operates shuttles that will come from the more remote areas to the Portland VA. I know some of those have started running again, but they're more limited in their scheduling. But if someone has to travel on like a shuttle to get up here, the VA can lodge folks overnight in a ADA hotel, so they're able to get around safely in the room.
Excellent. While other folks are waiting to think about their questions or putting them in the chat, I'll ask another one. So frequently when we meet people with ALS who are veterans, and we kind of learn a little bit more about their service, we will generally refer them to Paralyzed Veterans of America, because we found they have a lot of experience with ALS and they just kind of know how to get people connected into resources, although knowing there's a lot of different options for folks to go through. Kristi, I guess a good question for you is, if this person has never been involved in the VA system before, they've never received their care through the VA, what are generally, or maybe Michael, this is a good question for you too, what would you say is kind of generally the process for folks once they kind of get the paperwork in for service-connected benefits? How do they kind of navigate and get through to the rest of, how do they get to the Portland VA for the ALS clinic?
Well, I mean, I think it's varied. One of the things that I see is when you apply for that service-connected compensation, the PVA representative will help the veteran enroll in healthcare, whether that's, going to the online website where you can enroll, or working with a local enrollment officer at the VA to help them, get the paperwork submitted. That's the first step. And I think enrolling online is usually the best possible way to get enrolled in VA healthcare. But that's not an option for everybody. It's the quickest, I think. And from there, I think it can be a bit of a tricky process, because once you enroll in healthcare, the VA doesn't tell you that you have to then establish with a VA primary care provider. That's our process in the ALS clinic, is for folks to receive a VA primary care provider. But really, if someone's diagnosed with ALS in the community and they think that they want to get their care at the VA, I would recommend just having them contact the ALS clinic directly, and we can walk you through whatever process it is that you need to go to. And I'm guessing PVA would probably say something similar, just give them a call. But I don't want to speak for you, Michael.
You're right, it varies a lot. One of the things we've done is our nurse coordinator has been very involved, and she will go out and get the applications for enrollment. And some cases we can ask for catastrophically disabled determinations, where they can make the veteran a higher priority and get them enrolled because of the severity of their condition while they're pending their claim for service connection. So there's different ways to do things. And it's none of them are wrong, none of them are right. It's just whatever's best for you.
Great, thank you for that. And I think a good bottom line under that whole conversation is, talk to your care coordinator with the ALS Association if you have any questions about any of this, because we can definitely help get you plugged into the right people who can help answer questions. And certainly really appreciate being able to have folks within the VA system who we trust and who answer our calls. Thank you, Kristi, and thank you, Michael. Yeah, so do other folks have any questions for Kristi or for Michael?
We just filled you so full of information today that no question.
You guys just did such a phenomenal job. Well, in all seriousness, thank you so much, Kristi and Michael, for just a wealth of information. As we all know, the VA can be a tricky system to navigate. And so it's really helpful to get some information about this and just help support people in knowing where to go when they get a really difficult diagnosis like ALS. So thank you both for your time. And if folks have questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can help get those answered by Kristi or Michael. And yeah,
I do have one before we part. For the vehicle grant, I've already got the grant. Do I have to be in a wheelchair before I can actually use it and go get a van, or can I do that process ahead of time? How does that work?
You can use the grant anytime you wish to do it. However, a lot of people will wait till they have a wheelchair that needs transportation,
Yeah.
because like I said earlier, the grant's the chair is going to dictate what kind of equipment you need.
Yes.
If you need the floor lowered, the ceiling raised, so because they need to know how high you sit in a chair, how wide is the chair. So there's things that look like that. So you can use the grant at any time.
Yeah. Okay.
It's just a personal preference when you use the grant.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing I might say is that sometimes patients can get into power wheelchairs before you need it. So
that's going to be my next question.
yeah, so when we, see folks in the ALS clinic, sometimes the wheelchairs take a while to show up. It can
Mhm.
be a lengthy process. So you can get kind of like a pre-need power wheelchair. You know, we can have our power mobility team do an evaluation and see what might be the best wheelchair for you. Because then when you do need it, you have it, and then you don't have to wait 3 months to get it.
Okay.
So that's an option. You can certainly do that
Okay.
with the
So
ALS
How
clinic.
do I do that? You want to do that, cover that now, or you want me to give you a call on that? Because that's the route I'd like to go.
Okay. I will talk to the team.
Okay, thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
I have a question for you, Rick, if I may.
Yes.
When do you have the signed 4502 from the VA?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because that's
Yeah,
what
I've
we
got
want to
the
make
letter and the grant and everything. Yeah, I've got it all.
great. And we've been very proactive in getting that for veterans so they have it when they need it instead of waiting until they need it to get it.
Yeah,
And-
I've had it for 6 months. It was one of the first things that they processed.
Great. Just want to make sure you had that.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Excellent. Any other last questions before we close for the day? All right. Great. Well, thank you both again. Really appreciate your time. And for folks who are on today, we will go ahead and share out the recording and have that available on our website. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me a note or give me a call.
And Casey, I'll get that question answered for Liz and I'll send it to you so you can get it out to her.
Excellent. Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.